Today's video I'm doing is kind of a unique one because I was reading in this magazine right here, the one with Doink on it, which is from January 1994. By the way, the January 94 magazines are up on display on Instagram and Facebook right now, showing you what the newsstands looked like back then for a good throwback of better days when it came to wrestling magazines. But there's an article in this, and I'm going to get to that in a second because it ties with what I'm showing right now in the video package here. It's so I was back in December. I had the 1992 magazines up, and this is Inside Wrestling, December 92, and there's an article on why reviving the NWA title was a bad idea. Now, I'm going to do a little history thing really quick here. I think I explained this in another video, but I'll try to sum it up nicely here. The NWA originally was a board of directors of all the territories back in the 60s, 70s, and whatnot, and everyone who was a part of that had a right to use the NWA champion in their territory. So places like Florida or Georgia or, the Carolinas with Mid-Atlantic or even originally, WCCW in Texas, they could all use the NWA world champion to come to their territory to maybe pop the arena sales with the fans coming in to see perhaps it being Harley Race or Ric Flair or Dusty Rhodes or Jack Briscoe, whoever, all the great NWA world champions that we had over the years. And, of course, some companies didn't do that. The AWA was created, as an alternative to the NWA, and Vern Gagne pretty much said, screw them. I'm going to make my own promotion, my own belt, my own lineage of a world champion. And of course, the WWF with Vince McMahon Sr. was a part of the NWA board of directors, but he didn't use the NWA champion at all in his company. He still based the heavyweight championship of his promotion being the WWF title that Bruno Sammartino held for a majority of the time. But the funny thing is about that is even then, you almost have to wonder, was the McMahon's goal not to be, a part of that? Was the goal to compete? Because we all know Vince Jr. did, right? When he bought the name and the company from his dad, and he started eating up the territories. But it makes you wonder why Vince Sr. didn't use the NWA champion as his world champion in the New York territory. So that's something to think about. Anyways, the NWA ends up kind of dying off as the territories get eaten up. Funny thing is, Jim Crockett from Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling was eating up just as much of the territories as Vince was. Jim Crockett ended up owning like certain territories, like from like Alabama and from Florida and from Georgia, and he was eating up all these wrestling territories and creating the NWA as one. And of course, in the 80s, if you were a wrestling fan, if you knew of the WWF, you probably knew of the NWA, which at the time was the Jim Crockett Promotions. We knew of Ric Flair and the Four Horsemen. They were the NWA. Dusty Rhodes, Nikita Koloff, Magnum TA, that was the NWA. And of course, occasionally they would say the name World Championship Wrestling, which at the time was just a name of a television show. It was pretty much the Saturday night wrestling show, right? It was World Championship Wrestling at 6:05, a part of the NWA. And at the time, I mean, it was a little weird. Even then, it was like, well, why is there another name tied to that name? And it got even weirder as time went on, and this will explain why. In 1992, we had a tournament to crown a new NWA World Champion, while at the same time, Sting and Big Van Vader were feuding over the WCW World title. So, what happened? Well, Ric Flair was the last NWA World Champion and the first WCW World Champion, but held the same title as both. In 1991, after 2 years of Ted Turner purchasing the Mid-Atlantic promotion, which was, renamed NWA, from Jim Crockett, he decided to get rid of the NWA name altogether. He changed the name in 1988 to WCW. And I think he did that because he was such a fan of Georgia Championship Wrestling. That was originally on TBS, his TV station. He gave a home and life to Georgia Championship Wrestling. When Crockett bought Georgia and brought their champions in, brought their wrestlers in, the name World Championship Wrestling, like I said, still stayed for their Saturday night show. But I think Ted wanted that name to be the name. World Championship Wrestling sounds like it can compete with the World Wrestling Federation. It has world in the name, not national. National means just America, right? You're just national. You're not worldly. You're nationally. So, with that being said, World Championship Wrestling is created in 88, but they still use the NWA Championship name and title belts all the way to 1991, where in January they put a kibosh on that and the WCW name and belts were created. And eventually you started seeing the old title belts disappear and new title belts come in that were named WCW on them. However, the big gold belt here still stayed with Ric Flair. He ended up losing the title in Japan to Tatsumi Fujinami in a joint promotion pay-per-view-like event. And Fujinami won the NWA World title, but technically he didn't win the WCW World title because that was the belt that was being defended. What? How does that make sense? Ric Flair's still WCW World Champion, but Fujinami's NWA World Champion. Yet Fujinami has the belt, Flair doesn't, but Flair's still recognized. It was really confusing, and it led to Super Brawl 1, where Flair won back the title and pretty much was the undisputed WCW World Champion, only to give up the belt a few months later when he left World Championship Wrestling. He leaves, he takes the belt with him. And he gets stripped of the WCW title belt. They take Dusty Rhodes' old PWF Florida title that he had and put some kind of metal plate on it that said WCW. And there's Lex Luger's first world title at Great American Bash 91. It was just an old recycled championship belt that Dusty had in his promotion when he left the NWA many years ago before going back to the WWF. Now, NWA, though, Flair still recognized as champion. He's recognized as champion for a long time, to the point where Ric Flair shows up on WWF television with the big gold belt. And as well as the first debut of that is Bobby Heenan showing that title off on Wrestling Challenge to Gorilla Monsoon and Jim the Anvil Neidhart. So Flair ends up with the belt. He brings it in. They end up having to put a black circle over it. But the reason why they did that is because Flair was no longer holding that title. He did give the belt back to Japan and the NWA board of directors and all that. And eventually he had a WWF tag title belt that was made, created to look like a WWF world or WCW world title, NWA world title, whatever you want to say. And they have to bleep that out because of, because it's a fake title. Fans would know that. Only the ones in attendance saw it live. Now, I know I'm rambling here a bit, but this is all probably, I'd like to think, good, valuable information that you're getting. In 1992, there was talk WCW brings the name NWA back. It's like, why are they they just worked so hard in the last year or so to eliminate that lineage, to eliminate that name, that value, the NWA, only to talk about it again in the summer of 92, and a tournament takes place in Japan where Masahiro Chono defeats Ravishing Rick Rude to win the NWA World Heavyweight Championship. Now, if you turn the page here, if I can, come on, let's see here. So it says here, the NWA World Champion became WCW World Champion when the Federation changed initials. The Federation itself made a concerted effort to keep its title lineage intact. The initials may have changed, but Ron Simmons wears the same belt, figuratively at least, in 1992 that Lou Thesz wore in 1952. Given that Chono cannot be considered NWA World Champion in the historical sense, to call him NWA World Champion can only serve to cloud a situation that took 2 years to uncloud. Okay, so there it is, right? Masa Chono won the NWA title, but technically It's almost a new championship. There was no lineage there. The lineage still dates back to 1905, the same belt that Ron Simmons is now holding because he defeated Vader that night in Baltimore. Now, again, with all this being said, at the same time, they create the NWA World Tag Team titles at the Great American Bash 92, and Dr. Death, Steve Williams, and Terry Bam Bam Gordy defeat Dustin Rhodes and Barry Windham in the finals to win those belts, saying we have new initial NWA World Tag Team champions, which is complete bullshit because the Rock and Roll Express years ago are 4-time NWA World Tag Team champions. So I don't understand how all of a sudden we have a new NWA tag title as well when the WCW tag titles are the lineage to the NWA. Again, no wonder WCW kind of like bombed under their own success, right? Like they really were just, and AEW's going that same route right now too, but that's a different story. So I read all that and back in December, and I'm like, okay, that's cool. So now let's go to this. This is the PWI, like I said, January 94, and it talks about the NWA here, and it talks about how at Fall Brawl 93, that the NWA title was no longer talked about within World Championship Wrestling. So earlier that year, you saw Chono drop the belt to Muta, who dropped the belt to Windham, who dropped the belt to Flair. And now Flair is the reigning NWA World Champion. But as of, right here, I'm reading, as of September 1st, WCW elected not to renew its membership with the NWA. Therefore, we have no right to use the NWA name or promote a title match as an NWA title match. Yet clearly, the Flair-Rude match was a championship caliber match. And even before and after September 1st, the belt itself and the excellence, its I'm just, my voice, not my voice, but my mouth, my tongue's getting tied up here. The excellence it signifies remains a part of WCW. So WCW elected to rename the title simply the World Heavyweight title, and Rude currently holds that championship. That's right. That's when it became just the World Heavyweight title, which also seemed confusing because at the time, Big Van Vader was the WCW World Champion. So how do you have two world titles in the same promotion, and what title belt does a wrestler go for? And it made no sense. Now, it also says here, ECW President Todd Gordon, a member of the NWA Board of Directors, was able to lend some insight info into the championship situation. The NWA Championship will be decided in a tournament that will air throughout the U.S. and Japan. The NWA will legitimately be the only true World Heavyweight Champion, in that it will be defended the belt in all NWA areas, including New Zealand, Japan, the United States, Mexico, Puerto Rico, and all over the world. And the tournament is being targeted to take place close to the first of the year. Well, the tournament did not take place close to the first of the year. It actually took place in August of 1994, when, of course, by this time, Eastern Championship Wrestling is no more because it became NWA Eastern Championship Wrestling, and that organization would only last all of 8 months, 10 months maybe, because right here in August of 1994, ECW to hell with the NWA. What happened was real simple. ECW and the creative genius of, I guess, Paul Heyman and Todd Gordon to pretty much turn his back on the NWA, because he is part of the board of directors, as I just read. They pretty much screwed Dennis Coralluzzo out of anything involving the NWA in a positive note, because the tournament took place in ECW at the ECW arena in 1994. They only brought in like one Japanese wrestler in the tournament, and they brought in Benoit and Malenko, and tried to create like, oh, these guys, this is from Canada, this guy's from the States, they're independently, they're not in ECW. Well, the funny thing is, at the next TV taping, they are part of ECW, and both men went on to have success in ECW. So it really did just feel like an ECW show that they had the tournament. The finals was ECW heavyweight champion Shane Douglas against Too Cold Scorpio. Shane, of course, defeated Too Cold Scorpio to win the NWA World title, and as we all know, that famous speech where he threw down the NWA World title and told them all to kiss his ass and proclaimed himself the ECW World Heavyweight Champion. So at that moment, NWA Eastern Championship Wrestling was done, and the birth of Extreme Championship Wrestling was risen from the ashes like a phoenix, I suppose you could always say. And that was it. That was the pretty much the end of the NWA at that time until we saw it in the WWF in 1998, right? That was weird when Dan Severn walked in with the title. And then, of course, TNA using the NWA title for like 5 years as well in their promotion in the early 2000s. And thankfully, the NWA TNA brand, TNA brought the NWA title back to prestige again. Guys like Jeff Jarrett, AJ Styles, Raven, Rhino, Christian Cage, Abyss, even Sting had another run with that title. And of course, at this time, though, they're using the original NWA World title belt, the one we remember seeing the likes of Harley Race and Terry Funk and Jack Briscoe hold back in the 70s and early 80s. So there it is, a weird little history on the NWA World title involving WCW. Again, how do we have a promotion that is the NWA? You take away the letters, you change it to WCW, only to bring back the NWA name 2 years later, create a world title, try to make it seem like it is historical and has lineage, when yet the very lineage is your own WCW titles that go back to 1905. It just seemed like a ridiculous situation, and no wonder wrestling fans were confused. I remember being 13, 14 at the time, watching all this go on, thinking, I don't understand. I didn't understand, and I went for years trying to figure this out. How is the NWA back when the NWA is WCW? I didn't understand it. And to this day, I understand a little more. Of course, I just explained it, but it just makes no sense. It would be like, I don't know. It'd be like the WWE saying that Roman Reigns is on his verge of being the longest reigning WWE champion when in fact he's only held the title for 2 years but held the Universal title for 4. Universal title means shit. There's no lineage to that. It was created in 2016 when Finn Balor defeated Seth Rollins at SummerSlam and then was tarnished by injury because the belt got, given up the next night because Balor blew his shoulder out. I don't know, man. I don't get it. I guess with wrestling, it's all about rewriting history to how you want to see it as a promoter or as an owner or as a booker or as a creative writer within the business. I don't know. But man, let's be honest here. When you look back, the NWA was WCW. Yes, the Chono, Muda, and them are all NWA World Champions. But if you look at the history of TNA and you look at Jeff Jarrett's title reign, and you look at AJ Styles' title reign, on paper, they're NWA World Champion. But their lineage does not go back to 1905. As a matter of fact, when AJ Styles or Jeff Jarrett back in the day, or Ron the Truth Killings or Ken Shamrock held up that NWA World title, their lineage dates back to August 1992 when Masahiro Chono defeated Ravishing Rick Rude in Japan. That's it. I'm sorry they're NWA, but that's it. The name, it's all just the name. And the writers of the wrestling mags explain that rather well. So with that being said, for you listening, and if you did follow this, or if you're a fan of the NWA or WCW or even ECW here, or even TNA, what do you think about this? Do you think that when guys hold the NWA title now, and the NWA is around right now, Billy Corgan from Smashing Pumpkins has made it a promotion, and they're trying to do the territory thing. I believe EC3 is the reigning NWA World Champion right now. That lineage, EC3, like that belt, it dates back to Chono. Billy Corgan can try to bring back the history of the NWA all he wants. Unfortunately, that history is owned by Vince McMahon. Well, it's not even owned by Vince McMahon anymore. Who owns the WWE right now? TKO or The Rock. Is The Rock the new owner? Is The Rock Triple H's boss? I don't even know what's going on anymore in that promotion. But it does date to the WWE, the history there, because WWE purchased WCW, and they purchased everything that came with WCW, the history, the Georgia Championship Wrestling, the Alabama wrestling promotions, the Florida ones, all that. It's the Mid-Atlantic. It's all grouped into NWA, which became WCW, which dates all the way back to 1905. Whew, so there it is. But yeah, let me know what you people think. Is the NWA that EC3 has, do you feel its lineage dates back to 1905, or does it date back to 1992 with Masahiro Chono? All right. This was an interesting video today. I know I was kind of, like I said, I was bored yesterday. It was raining. Started scrolling, looking through mags, and I thought, man, I could do maybe a little cool video on this NWA WCW thing. So I hope you enjoyed it. And I'm thinking tomorrow I'm going to have my two out of three parcels in for magazines. So that's kind of exciting. It looks like it's going to be tomorrow. But I don't know if I'll be able to get around to recording it tomorrow. I work tomorrow from 4 to 12. So I probably won't get into it until Friday. And then if so, there'll be a big video of my showings of what magazines I got in those parcels. So until I do my next one, I'll talk to you guys later.